Welcome everyone who is joining us in person and over Zoom. My name is Julia. I'm the Community Relations Specialist here at the Diving Museum, and I am glad you are all joining us tonight. I do want to thank tonight's sponsor, which is Easy Storage. Upcoming events, let's talk about those. Like Lisa said, we have our featured exhibit, Salvaging the Deep. That's open until December 31st this year. So you do have some time, but make sure you see it before it leaves. From now until Labor Day, we have our Blue Star Museum program, and that means all active duty members of the military get free admission with up to 5 members of their families. So let your military friends know. We are a participating museum, and there are a ton of others out there. So make sure they take advantage of that program before it ends on Labor Day. Coming up in July on the 20th, we have guided tours that are available with your admission. That's not normally something we offer as included with your admission. So be sure to come by for a guided tour. It's going to be focused on Women's Dive Day. That's going to be on Saturday, July 20th at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. The last thing I'll mention is we have our ongoing raffle right now for a Mark V dive. So if you have seen those big heavy duty metal helmets and that suit, they're going to get you suited up in that and take you for a vintage dive in that equipment. That is a raffle that is available for $30. You get a ticket, and then if you win, you get to do that Mark V dive. Yep, it is pretty heavy. So next month's program, we are going to have a lecture on Florida Keys underwater archaeology with Matthew Lawrence of NOAA. He also works with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And for those of you that don't know, the Florida Keys are full of tons of different shipwrecks. So he's going to talk a little bit about those cultural resources and diving them, preserving them. For tonight's talk, we have with us tonight Sarah Curry, Executive Director and founder of Sereia Films. She is going to be talking about the films that she makes, which focus on Florida's sustainable seafood. So all of these different farms that are here in Florida and the different options that you have for your dinner to be more sustainable for our oceans. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things off to Sarah, and we are going to get started.
Hello. Thanks for coming. Like she said, my name is Sarah Curry. I started Sereia Films, and we're going to talk about seafood in Florida. How many of you guys are local? And okay, like most of you guys. Awesome. Let's go in here. So then you guys know that we live in. Okay, good. We're back. A really special ecosystem, nowhere like it on Earth, right? We have all these amazing, diverse ecosystems on land and our great Florida Reef right offshore here. We have Florida Bay in our backyard. And that's why a lot of people come to Florida. I'm not from here. I'm actually from Louisiana, but I came here thinking that there was going to be great local seafood at all the restaurants. And since we're a state with 1,300 miles of shoreline, that there was going to be just really great access to local seafood. That wasn't quite the case. And that's part of what prompted this docu-series that we are now making. I studied undergraduate at LSU, studying marine biology, and then I went to work on commercial fishing boats out of New Bedford, Massachusetts as a fisheries observer. So I got to see industrial fishing and learn about bycatch, and it made me realize there was so much I didn't know about food production, and particularly seafood production. And then I went to graduate school, studied environmental journalism, and went back home to Louisiana. And there I learned about fish farms and moved to Florida and started to work for a small production company that was making seafood films, and a few years later started Sereia Films to continue that work. I was actually hiking in Portugal on the Fisherman's Trail, met these fishermen. They were harvesting gooseneck barnacles or perception, and they were like, "We're looking for Sereias." And I was like, "What's that?" And they're like, "Mermaids." And so that's where the name comes from. And so we like to say that we're combining art and science to tell these stories about seafood. And it was initially an environmental education nonprofit, but now we kind of focus in on my passion and area of expertise which is seafood. And so we like to tell folks that we're protecting the ocean by helping you make smarter seafood choices. And we particularly do that through our main focus is our films. This is Nicolette Mariano, who is the subject of our recent oyster film. She's out of Sebastian. We'll get into that a little more later, but we talk about a specific aquaculture producer or commercial harvester, and then follow that seafood through the end to the end user. But it takes all types of communication. We don't just do film work. We kind of use these films as a starting point. We also conduct farm tours for chefs. We do some direct engagement through events, and we host seafood tasting events. We have some online education. So I'll just go through that a little bit. Our film screenings, this is down in Key West. This is more local at Bud and Mary's. And we get our commercial guys and our aquaculture gals and NGOs all together in a room talking. And we're hoping to have conversations that cross these sometimes barriers that are out there. We do educational outreach. We'll be at Art Walk tomorrow night and at a baseball game this weekend. And so we get out into the community. We do some direct engagement with chefs and restaurants by bringing them samples when we can. So we brought Treasure Coast shellfish oysters to some restaurants in Miami and more recently the Keys. And we love when chefs get excited about local seafood and end up putting them on their menu. So this happened in Miami at Orno, and recently down at Papa Joe's too. You can find Nicolette's oysters. We offer chef tours for farm tours for chefs at different fish farms. And if you go to our website, we have new information about seasonality of seafood. So we also do tasting events, not yet in the Florida Keys, but in Miami. We had 3 Meet Florida Fish Farmer events where we serve seafood from 7 different farms around the state so people could really try this stuff. And we also have Trashy Tuesdays, which is beach cleanup once a month. We've removed some trash from our coastlines, and we have a couple coming up. So we'll put this up again at the end. So that's kind of what we do. Here's an overview of our work in the community this past year. And so now we're gonna really dive into, well, almost. So our films give us access to the seafood space in a pretty unique way. So we're interviewing commercial fishermen and aquaculturists, but then we bring this information to consumers and go through all the kind of steps along the way. And so I think it gives us a unique perspective on what's happening in the seafood space. What I hope our takeaways are from tonight is that healthy oceans are going to be a community effort. Making smart seafood choices is one of them, but obviously there's a lot of work going on in the Keys. So your seafood choices matter, and supporting local fishermen and aquaculturists is key. We're going to give you some direct tips for that. And then Florida has a diversity of seafood, wild and farmed. We're really encouraging folks to be responsible when they're in our environment, boaters, anglers, snorkelers, and then support general conservation efforts. So one thing I want us to keep in mind as we go through this presentation is the majority of the seafood we eat in the United States is imported. And when COVID happened, that kind of shook that global supply chain. And I think it made me running Sereia and certainly folks around the US kind of rethink that and say, hey, maybe we need some more local access to seafood. We're going to go through the Florida seafood space a bit with these different sectors: commercial, recreational, aquaculture, and bait fish. So commercial fishing, this is a shot from our spiny lobster film that we recently did down in the Keys. Fisheries can sometimes be exclusive, just in terms of the terminology that's used. So if you go online, you're gonna, I mean, I've been in this space for a while and it's hard to understand some of this stuff. So NOAA has a glossary where you can actually go in and, but I just put this up here to get folks to think about the fact that we're trying to make information accessible, but the seafood industry speaks its own language. So you have to kind of be prepared for that when doing this. Federally, I'll bring up my notes here. Federally, our fisheries are managed by the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and so that, and by NOAA. So we have 8 fisheries management bodies around the US that help manage our federal fisheries. And like I mentioned earlier, Florida is special, and it's special when it comes to fisheries management. We're split right down the middle. So we have 2 different management bodies that we work with, and also down in the Caribbean as well. So it's confusing. But we, generally speaking, have some of the most well-managed fisheries in the world. And a lot of work goes into that. It's kind of a federal mandate to maintain these sustainable fisheries and reduce any overfishing. And so there's a lot of hard people working towards that. Nationally, these are some of the highest landing species as far as price goes. And our top species in Florida, you could guess, are shrimp, stone crab, spiny lobster, blue crab. 2021, I think this is just commercial, obviously, supporting a lot of jobs around the state and having a pretty good economic impact. And in Monroe County, we're really dependent on our spiny lobster and snapper fisheries. So this is a still from our lobster film as well.
But do we export that?
We keep a lot of, yeah, that's a great question. We keep a lot of our snapper and grouper here locally, and I'll share some of the restaurants and markets that serve those. But we definitely export a lot of our spiny lobster. I'm not sure about stone crabs, but yes, we export in general in the US and in Florida a lot of our great seafood. It's recognized around the world as some of the highest quality seafood. And so we do export a lot, but we're trying to get some more kept here locally. These are some West Coast leading species. And then we have East Coast, sorry. Just to give you an idea of what we're harvesting where. And this is James and his son. They're the subjects of our latest film on the yellowtail snapper fishery down in the Keys. We're going to be releasing that shortly. And I'm going to play our first clip from our lobster film. So we're going to do a little.
So that the Keys can continue to have a commercial fishing industry. But where do our Florida lobsters even end up?
The majority of the lobsters harvested in the Keys end up in China alive. We bring them in alive, happy and healthy in a live well system. From there, they get transported to some holding warehouse facility of some sort, probably in Miami. And from there, they catch a flight to China. And China will pay more for a lobster, for a Florida lobster, than anyone else in the world. They just love it.
By Christmas, normally the fishing slows way down. The Chinese market, though, goes way up. We can catch half as many lobsters and make twice as much. Usually, we've had the Chinese pay as much as $22, $23 a pound for lobster, whereas right now the price is around $8 a pound for lobster.
Live export of lobsters to China is a huge boom, but what happens if it's a bust?
Tom Matthews.
So we're gonna get into recreational fishing. It's not my practice area of expertise, but it'd be remiss to not bring this up because it's such a huge part of our Florida seafood industry. How many of you guys are recreational fishers? Couple, few, right? So these are some stats from NOAA about what we're landing poundage wise recreationally and commercially. So we're bringing in a lot of recreational fish, and I think it was estimated there were 40 million recreational trips in 2018 in Florida. So
Pounds means catch, not catch and release. It doesn't include catch and release. You have pounds.
I believe that's correct, yeah.
And does that include lionfish?
I'm not sure.
If the audience does that, I can just be sure to repeat it for everyone, because they can't hear the audience.
Okay, so we just got asked if this includes lionfish recreationally. And so how recreational catch is kind of analyzed is through a survey program. So if folks have lionfish, then that would be included. But I don't know the lionfish specific stats. So it's the Marine Recreational Information Program, and it's a survey that was conducted at the dock and on online, and then calling people, and they're kind of revamping this to get more accurate numbers because it is such a huge part of our landings here in Florida. There's a lot of challenges in the recreational fishing industry. There's a lot of challenges in the commercial fishing industry. And they're oftentimes the same: water quality. If we have time later, we're gonna play a clip with a researcher from FIU who's looking at pharmaceuticals in our waters around Florida and finding them in redfish. Obviously, we had a really hot summer last summer here in the water. They're anticipating that's going to happen again. How is that impacting the fish? There's a lot of use of these resources, post-catch mortality. So this sector has a lot of challenges. I was driving and saw this boat next to me, and just put this picture in here to remind viewers online and you guys that the Keys is its own microcosm within this recreational space, and we are out there bowling netting and getting our lobsters and have spiny lobster mini season, and this is a huge part of our culture. So we're hoping that folks are out there fishing responsibly, and here's a few resources. So Return 'em Right is helping to maintain reef stocks by teaching people how to release them properly. Keep Fish Wet is a nonprofit that's doing similar things. You guys probably have heard of Captains for Clean Water and Bowfish Turbine and Trust, two local organizations who are doing great recreational work. We're hoping folks are properly disposing of fishing line too. We live with all this beautiful wildlife in South Florida, and anytime we're leaving this out in our environment, animals like this beautiful brown pelican can get hurt. So bait fish is a really interesting, cool part of our sector that infiltrates kind of all these other industries from commercial. So when we're out yellowtail fishing, we use a lot of chum throughout the day. And we're baiting with chicken gizzards, actually, so not bait fish, but and then recreationally, obviously, we're using bait. So it's estimated, I have the number here, that Floridians are spending $274 million on live bait a year. So that's just live bait. And so that's a lot. That's right now coming from the wild. But it's really cool. The aquaculture industry is supplementing that a bit. This photo is found in the Everglades, so dispose of your trash if you're out fishing. But what's interesting is this is a farm-raised fish. You can see on there, born raised, harvested in Florida. And so most of the shrimp that we're growing in farms aren't native shrimp, so you can't really use that as live bait. So this was frozen. But there's a really great organization called Live Advantage Bait that's learning how to aquaculture saltwater bait to help supplement this bait industry to leave more in the ocean. So exciting things happening with that. And we're in the Keys, and so we have our own cooler full of bait that, you know, this is just like a big impact on our resources and fisheries locally that I think it's important to remember, even though we're not eating it directly. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the talk. We're going to talk about aquaculture, which has historically not had a great reputation. When I first learned about aquaculture, I just heard kind of the horror stories about it as well. But as part of my master's project, I went back to LSU or Louisiana and learned about fish farming for the first time. Went to my first tilapia farm, catfish farm, and that's actually how half of our seafood is produced globally. So this has been happening for a long time. It's where we get a lot of our seafood, and there's been huge advancements in this space in recent years. Florida is super cool. We have the most diverse aquaculture industry in the United States. So on the left, there's a map that the state produced showing the different species that are grown around the state. I know it's hard to see, but we are growing about 1,500 species on about 1,000 different farms. And this is such an in-depth topic that FAU Harbor Branch just hosted a series of public workshops. They're available online. I can share those links with you. They're 3-hour-long workshops that they did over the course of 4 months. So there's a lot of information about this very diverse industry here in Florida. A lot of it, about half of what's produced is ornamental fish, so stuff we're finding in our aquarium. We're going to focus on the food fish and the shellfish, but in that other category is bait fish, again, like we mentioned, and fish that's being raised for stock enhancement. So we didn't really have time to get into that a ton, but we are releasing some redfish and some snook, not the same way as other states are doing it, more as a kind of when we need to do that, not every year. We're not trying to constantly do that. We also are growing alligators, turtles. We're not going to be talking much about that, but huge diversity of species here in Florida, which is pretty cool. We've worked with a few farms at this point that we filmed. I'm gonna go through them a bit. First, we have the Evans Farm, which is a sturgeon farm, growing 3 species of sturgeon to produce fresh from Florida caviar. They are featured in one of our films, and this is a special farm because it's a family-run operation by these 3 generations of women, and they're also raising cattle and timber, and they have the caviar in tanks and in ponds, and they're doing hybrid striped bass and tilapias. They're doing like a lot on this farm to try to sustain themselves and to work into different markets, because to have a farm that's successful over generations, you kind of need different ways to make money. And so they get into that a bit in this film that you can see on our YouTube page and on our local PBS. So they sell their tilapia and hybrid striped bass more into the live market and restaurants, because their sturgeon's taking about like 10 years to get ready to harvest. So this is a picture from the farm. It's called Anastasia caviar. It's really delicious. And most all of our caviar that we're eating in the United States is imported. And one issue with imported seafood can be that different preservatives and additives are put in that we just don't allow here. And so that's just another reason that if you can source locally, and local even meaning within the US, that's a really great option. We have pretty strict regulations. So for our folks online, the question was, there's like a lot of concerns with farm seafood, from the feed to water quality conditions. And so folks are curious about that. those are great questions. Did you want me to add something?
No, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, in a lot of ways, farm seafood that's done well now addresses all of those issues and can be more fresh and healthier than some of our wild seafood. Trying to think of which thing to answer first. Okay. Feed wise, so finding a great aquaculture is you want to find the right species and you want to find the right environment to grow that fish in. So these farms in Florida are highly regulated and they're done in a place where they're not harming the environment. So that's one thing. In the case of shellfish, they're improving their environment. And they're also pulling water from the aquifer that isn't being contaminated with what some of our wild seafood might be exposed to. And feed wise, there's been like huge advancements in creating really great feeds for that specific fish. Salmon's been grown around the world for a while, so that's pretty kind of solid feed, except for the fact that, you know, salmon like to eat other fish and we're pulling these fish from the ocean. And so a big concern is how do we produce feed for carnivorous fish without depleting ocean resources. And so there's work being done on integrating algal oils and bugs, and there's a whole movement for kind of improving feed for fish. And I'd love to make a feature-length film on feeds for aquaculture. I'm not sure who would watch it, but yeah, that's a great question and point. So the farms that we've chosen to highlight are specifically known for their sustainability practices. So shellfish is kind of inherently sustainable because there's no inputs into these systems where they face other challenges because they are exposed in the open water to hurricanes and to other issues like that. But there's lease areas that are around the state where there's been a lot of testing. So these sites can be selected very specifically on areas that are good for growing shellfish. So for example, Two Dock Shellfish is in South Tampa Bay. They're growing clams, but they're also growing oysters. But this is kind of the southern end of this clam range. The majority of clams in Florida are grown up near Cedar Key. But this is a cool film, family-run farm. Unfortunately, they were hit with hurricanes, and that whole West Coast shellfish industry has taken a hit. And also the shrimp boats on the West Coast that used to be one of our highest producing commercial species, but a lot of the shrimp boats in Fort Myers got destroyed with hurricanes. So a lot of these issues facing similar issues, but clams actually, you know, leave the water. Clams and oysters leave the water body cleaner than it started, and
No red tide issues with farming clams, right?
they do, and this is brought up in the film. You know, Aaron, who runs Two Dock Shellfish, is really aware of that, and so he's diversifying his farming locations. But yeah, the state will close down areas, and even when there's rainfall, there's precautionary closures because Florida's so low lying, and so they actually have to get sampled. The water bodies have to be sampled before they can be reopened. But yeah, red tide is an issue for, you know, Florida farmers, like shellfish farmers, and commercial species as well. I'm gonna keep answering your questions, hopefully, as I go through these. Aquaco is a great farm. It's a pompano farm. It's the only one of its kind. So with regards to feed, when we have more of these novel species, there isn't, you know, it's harder to access good feed. And so to make these farms sustainable, they need to be environmentally sustainable. They need to be economically sustainable. And that's a hard task, particularly for novel species like pompano, where there's not maybe a developed feed that's used as regularly. So pulling up my notes, making sure I'm not missing things. These are the beautiful pompano. It's also been sampled at our Meet Florida Fish Farmers events. Hopefully we can have one down in the Keys. So most of these products we try to get folks to sample. This Sun Shrimp is an awesome shrimp farm on the west coast of Florida on Pine Island. Hurricane came through there, but they actually did great. Shrimp is one of the most consumed seafoods in the US, and there can be some issues with bycatch for wild caught shrimp industry. We do have things like TEDs, turtle exclusion devices, that are put on commercial boats to help reduce that. But land-based farm shrimp can be a great option. Unfortunately, like the majority of the shrimp we're eating is imported from places, and we're not necessarily testing everything that comes in. And we're just importing a lot of shrimp. So it's really exciting when there's a sustainable local option that's not putting antibiotics or preservatives on their shrimp. And during COVID really hurt the seafood industry in a lot of ways, but it was helpful in the fact that kind of forced producers to sell direct to consumers. And that's what Sun Shrimp is able to do. So we'll talk about that a little later, where you can like order Sun Shrimp at your house. And we're gonna try to do another video clip, even though that was a little tricky.
People have this concept that, oh, shrimp are fresh. They're seeing them in the case at their local grocery store. So there's no such thing as a fresh shrimp anymore. All the shrimp are frozen, especially stuff coming from overseas. It comes in containers that's frozen, many months old. We consume 1.6 billion. We import roughly 90% of that. It's really unfortunate, but pretty much every shrimp you see on the shelf today in America has been treated. I would say 99% has been treated with something. The use of chemical preservatives and all kinds of lotions and potions to make the shrimp gain weight and to make them look better than what they are, that is very much in use all over the world. And we say, look, it's not necessary. There's a market for that shrimp. People are eating it, people like it, but we want to do something better. We want to create a better thing. We can sell a product that hasn't been treated, and that is quite unique.
We export a lot of our seafood in the United States, and that's because other folks love it too. So Treasure Coast shellfish, mentioned this a little. You've seen some clips of Nicolette. This is her and some of her workers off of Sebastian near the Pelican Island Wildlife Refuge. I think that's the name of it. Kind of in the Indian River Lagoon area. And one of the only couple oyster farms on the East Coast. Historically, we were harvesting a lot of oysters, wild oysters from the Apalachicola region. That wild fishery has been shut down until 2025 for a few different reasons. With our films, we try to address some ideas and misconceptions about seafood. So for this film, we were addressing the fact that a lot of chefs and consumers don't think that Florida oysters are good because they're grown in warm water, and they prefer to have them from the Northeast or Pacific Northwest, which is unfortunate because I love supporting local farmers like Nicolette, and shellfish can be one of the best seafoods to eat because it's highly traceable. So with every oyster that you're eating, whether it's from Florida or not, it will have a harvest tag associated with it. And so theoretically, you should be able to ask for this at a restaurant and see exactly when it was harvested and where it was harvested. And so on here, you can see this Indian River Lagoon, and that 7202 is the number that you could pull up the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, which deals with our aquaculture and see on the map exactly where her lease is. And and so we talk a lot about in the film how these regulations are in place and maintaining the cold supply, the cold chain throughout the supply chain is like critical for oysters, and how, you know, it's 2024, so we actually can do that. We have refrigerated trucks. We are monitoring the temperatures inside their coolers constantly. They have to keep records of that are checked quarterly by the state. Their sites are inspected. This is highly regulated, and on the receiving end, when it goes to the distributor, they're checking the temperature of the product when it comes to you. And then so from the time it's harvested until it gets to your plate on at the restaurant, you should be able to get this. Information. Suncoast Tilapia, I'm gonna keep cruising through here a little, is our latest film, and this is kind of revolutionary in the fact that they're trying to make a sustainable protein that's affordable for Americans, produced in America. And so they're hoping to build the first processing plant for tilapia. So a lot of tilapia or swai, which is kind of like catfish that's similar, that we import, you know, it's cheaply produced and processed elsewhere, and we can get it pretty cheap. We eat a lot of it, and it's a great seafood to eat. And so now we're trying to do that here locally. Distribution is a whole new, all of these could be their own talks. Distribution is tricky within seafood. It often is harvested or grown in one place, goes to the initial processor, then goes to the secondary processor, then goes to the distributor. So it can change hands 4, 5, 10 times before it gets to you. That adds on environmental costs and uncertainty. So it's really great to have kind of shorter supply chain. So we have this salmon from Homestead in this picture. This is at Publix. This is available at Publix right down the street. And we have some grouper here from Florida. I think that's grouper. So we're gonna get into right now what you can do as a consumer, but the big thing is start to pay attention where your seafood is coming from. And again, if you can buy seafood from the US, that really shortens that supply chain down and is better for us. That's in contrast to like our Treasure Coast shellfish oyster that's going straight to the distributor and then ending up at Papa Joe's here. So that's much closer than coming from around the world and going through, you know, other folks. So consumer tips, buy local, like I've been saying, whether at the grocery store. We haven't done a film on Atlantic Sapphire, but it's the largest land-based salmon farm in the United States. And they're pulling water from the aquifer and creating a sustainable salmon locally. So like I think 96% of the salmon we eat in the United States is imported, whether from Chile or Norway, or even the Alaskan salmon is sometimes exported to China to be processed and then re-imported. And so it's pretty cool that we have salmon here locally. Sun Shrimp is this farm that we already mentioned. If you go use Sereia 10, you can get $10 off your order. They have this new product called Power Bites. They're trying to make their product more accessible to people to compete with all these imports and have a lower priced shrimp. There's another shrimp farm on the East Coast called Homegrown Shrimp. And so we're really encouraging people to ask where your seafood's from, even if the server doesn't necessarily have that information. Keep asking, because that's how folks are going to know that these issues are important to us. And support establishments that are sourcing locally. And so here are a handful of restaurants in the Keys that from fishermen and other people we know that they're selling directly to these restaurants. It can sometimes be more expensive, and definitely think about that a lot, how to make sustainable seafood more affordable and accessible to people. And there's not really an easy answer that I can give you at this point in time. Be open to trying new things. We made a film called Eat the Whole Fish. This is a heart of a tuna. This is a very innovative chef from Italy who's in Miami. So he's cooking the entrails. So this is kind of a funny extreme example. But this is a cool episode. It's on our website. He also cooks ballyhoo 3 ways. So eating the bait fish, kind of flipping the script on what we think we know about seafood. So, maybe be open to trying some mullet. We smoked some mullet and had Florida farm shrimp last 4th of July. It was awesome, sustainable meal. This is tilapia. That was served as ceviche at our Meet Florida Fish Farmers event from this Florida farm. And so people have this idea like, oh, I don't like tilapia. I certainly don't like it as ceviche. Well, it's grown in good water quality conditions. It's fed high quality feed, and it's harvested and without using preservatives and any other chemicals. So that's actually pretty rare and cool about farmed fish is they can maintain a steady supply and be harvested right before you're eating them. So eat in season. Formed and listen to podcasts. There's a lot of seafood podcasts out there, and all these fisheries management council. You can sit on their council meetings. I don't know if you want to do it. It's pretty tedious, but you can, and they have some dates coming up, or sit on a seafood advisory council meeting. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. And again, support conservation efforts. Come to our beach cleanups in the next couple months. Be a responsible angler. FWC says if you see something, say something. Give them a call if you see folks doing something illegal out there on the water. Take a picture. Download these apps so that you can have access to regulations. Kind of not knowing them isn't really an excuse at this point. And then participate in invasive species tournaments. There's a really cool one. It's actually not lionfish, but lionfish is one of them. This is up in the Miccosukee host this, and so it's called Swamp Invaders. It's in April, May. But yes, down here in the Keys, we know we're lionfish. So removing fish that aren't supposed to be from an ecosystem is great.
What was that one?
This was a Oscar. So yeah, so they're out catching tilapia and Oscar, and it's really super fun. It's called Swamp Invaders, April or March. So that's it. Thank you for coming in. Let me know what questions you have.
All those resources that were in your presentation, can we find them on your website?
Most of them.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so we were asked if these are on our website, and most of them, and we'll make sure to include them on our website. But yes, most of them are, and all of our films are on our website.
How many films did you produce?
With this docu-series, 12, and
They're on this site.
yes, and we are working on one now about sponge restoration. We're kind of in pre-production for some others. So, but yeah, they are on PBS and online as well.
We can access the film online, and or do we need to?
Yes, you can access the film on our website, SereiaFilms.org, and on YouTube. And we have our social media, where we break down these 15-minute videos into more 1-minute clips, and find us online too. Yes.
Rosersfield, the University of Miami's Marine School, I know they're doing work on aquaculture. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah,
The
question is, there's work being done at UM on aquaculture, and if we've worked with them at all. And we host public tours to their aquaculture research facility a few times a year. And they're doing really cool stuff these days with seaweeds. So seaweed is very sustainable and it's being done around the US, but we haven't done that as much here in Florida with some edible species. So they're doing research on that. And they're also looking into integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, which means taking the wastewater from maybe a finfish and using that to grow some of these seaweeds and things like that. So we take the general community and chefs to visit them. So, yeah.
I have two questions from Zoom. So one is, have you heard about what Disney's Epcot is doing with aquaculture?
I know that they have their that exhibit that they're doing aquaponics. And I'm guessing that's what they're referring to. Haven't been there recently, but
Until after they're growing and then the wastewater gets used to whatever else, and they got their lettuce and all that stuff working together. It's pretty
yeah, so they
magical.
use the water from the fish to grow the plants, which is really cool. We haven't done a film specifically on that yet, but
Doing a Disney film would be very. The other question on Zoom was, what sort of seafood, if you live in South Florida, should you be eating?
well, if you live in South Florida, I would recommend eating lionfish if you can. And eating local and both wild caught in season and also trying local farm seafood. So these resources that we mentioned tonight, the salmon, the shrimp, the oysters, shellfish, eating kind of lower on the food chain. So I would recommend diversifying your seafood choices, getting outside of kind of your mental box of what you think you like. Eating seafood that you catch or that you get from people.
So how do you know if it's a good farm seafood? Because some farm seafood, from what I've seen, is
Right, so the question is, how do you know if it's a good farm or not? So I think the default would be if it's from the United States, because we have really stringent regulations on our farms. And there's different seafood certifications that farms can get. We didn't even get into that, it's its own talk. If a farm has this best aquaculture practices or aquaculture ASC, those are good farms. We have these for folks, but that if a farm doesn't have that, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad farm. It might just be too small to go through the certification process. So US farms, I think, are a great choice. And your seafood purveyor, whether it's a restaurant or at the grocery store, should be able to give you some information about the seafood. And so if they can't, maybe stay away from it. But we have country of origin labeling laws, so you should be able to get that information.
those are fairly new laws because it seems like they're fighting a battle, they're having a bad reputation. I think she brought it up earlier, it's, bacteria and the farms are bad. And so seems like they're struggling with bad reputation, like having to overcome a lot of bad publicity and bad practices from the past, and now things are changing. How is
Yeah, I think the question is, historical perceptions of fish farms, and they're not great. And that's because, like any industry, there's some bad players, and sometimes that makes sexier headlines. There hasn't been a lot of positive aquaculture stories, and we're hoping to contribute to that. And also there's been some pretty great advancements within the aquaculture industry. But some of these farms, and they're not kind of in your mainstream stores, and so they're just not getting in front of people a lot. And so these misconceptions are pretty prevalent. But again, US farms are doing awesome work to provide food fish, but they're also doing great restorative work too, whether it's you know, corals and sponges or oyster restoration aquaculture. So I think we need to give it a second chance.
Thank you. So thank you again for being our speaker this month. As a thank you from the History of Diving Museum, we are going to give you a membership so you can come visit us every day of the year except for 3. And we also have a unique t-shirt for you to celebrate our new featured exhibit. So,
Cool, thank you.
so thank you for giving this talk. It's your swag bag.
Thanks. And we have these seafood tip cards up here that I'd love to pass out, as well as Seafood Watch rating cards, and for the Southeast and nationally, and I think we have our sushi cards too. So we have some resources for folks in person and online.
Okay, well, that's it. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.